My name is Matt Watson. I'm with Tactical Operation Consulting. This is just a brief overview on kind of my experience and background. As far as today goes, with the focus being on home defense, most of my law enforcement career was spent in special weapons and tactics, teaching folks close quarter battle. Actually spent time on the federal government side as a special tactics unit instructor. So I was teaching federal agents how to clear structures, buildings, and even in our high threat environments. So we have small teams that would deploy overseas, and I was responsible for training them on what we call a break-in, break-out. The idea being somebody important was inside of a structure and they needed to be brought back out and rescued. So I was teaching them how to do that. Most of my law enforcement certifications are through Virginia, except for being a federal law enforcement firearms instructor and defensive tactics, close quarter battle instructor. So that's all well and good when we look at the grand scheme of things, but when we get into the finer details, our focus here today, this morning, is coming up with kind of a home defense plan. And the reason for that is probably the preeminent information data there on the screen. Through the Department of Justice, we're reporting just over 1 million home invasions occur every year in the US, all right, which is quite startling. We're going to expand on that. I do have some videos that I'm going to show you. They are somewhat disturbing. I want you first and foremost to come up with two definitions. One, what is the definition of robbery? Anybody?
That's a violent crime against people.
Yeah, so it's a crimes against person. So you can't rob an unoccupied structure. So if your house is empty, your house can't be robbed. You can be robbed, right? An individual or individuals can be robbed. Well, if there's no one home in the house and somebody breaks in, that's still a crime. What crime is that we're speaking of? Yeah, it's burglary, all right? So things to think about, because sometimes what ends up happening is we interchange. Oh, you know, I was on vacation, my house got robbed. Now everyone recognizes what that means, and I don't want to be that person who's like, no, that's incorrect usage of grammar. This is what it actually means. Bless your heart for not knowing, all right? But I stress this because when we start looking at data and research, I don't want you to confuse one over the other. Of the two, which do you think is worse? Is one worse than the other? Yeah, because think of it as I'm home in bed asleep with my family members and someone breaks into my house and commits this crime. All right, to me that's worse. Now both are bad, make no mistake. I don't want anyone just to kick in my front door and steal my stuff. But honestly, I'd prefer to not be home when that happened. Now I could play the hero card and be like, no, I want to be there and stop this, ha ha. All right. But the reality is I'm going to be, in my Superman underoos at 3 o'clock in the morning, half awake and kind of stumbling around. And, my daughter and my wife's lives are at risk. This isn't the time for me to want to be Superman and be the hero. All right. So this first video we're going to show is actually home camera footage of a daylight robbery. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. The individuals who did the break-in in the occupied house, apartment, allegedly, and again, there's unfortunately no finite details because even the criminal complaint's a little questionable, but allegedly the individuals who broke in had reason to believe that money was being stored upstairs in one of the bedrooms by an occupant who was staying with the family. Now, whether or not said monies were from illicit activities kind of remains to be seen. But I want to show you this. So you get the gist of it. And that's pretty much what the remainder of the video goes on. Does this seem like, one, a professionally done heist, if you will? All right. Now, this was well before COVID, so the idea of people wearing masks on just, a daily basis, going to your 7-Eleven Sheetz, that wasn't the norm like it is now. So obviously, the minute these folks showed up, that would have been the first clue. The other thing being, you've got one individual who's armed, or at least displaying what looks to be a pistol, is they're engaging the two individuals we see mostly on screen, the two males. Does it seem like they actually have some type of plan? Like they didn't search the first floor, did they? They came through and they immediately went up the stairs. Kids are home. It's in the middle of the day. I mean, this is one of those worst case situations. This was a townhouse that was several individuals stayed there. You saw the two women with their kids. Whether the intent, there was some criminal aspect, to me, it doesn't matter. You still put these women and children at risk. And the blatancy of it kind of being in the middle of the day. Now, here's one. It's at the evening time. A homeowner's asleep. And you're going to see that's a view here of the front door.
Video from inside the home shows the moment it happened.
During the video, you can see that it looks like there was 4 individuals that kicked the door in. As they approached his bedroom, he exchanged fire with them.
Police say the man inside the home was asleep, and just before midnight Wednesday, these men kicked the door open and entered the home. Warren County Sheriff Brett Hightower says several shots were fired before the suspects ran from the scene.
We don't know if any of the suspects were injured as well, but the resident himself was taken here locally and then transferred to a Louisville hospital.
Officials say the homeowner was shot in his right hand. Now deputies are hoping this video can help them find those responsible.
It kind of plays into what the mindset of those individuals were when they forcibly made entry into somebody's home, came in there armed and attempting to locate somebody and exchanging gunfire with them and shooting somebody. It's invaluable to have that type of video footage.
Hightower says since putting this video on Facebook, his team has received several tips and they are working to follow up on those leads. Video from
So with that, the second video was a mobile home. Was it an isolated structure? What is out in the middle of nowhere? I mean, I don't know if you could tell, there was, as they panned away, there was another mobile home right next to it. So, as we know, with mobile homes, typically they're in parks. And my assumption is there's probably several others that are all within earshot, if that happened. Just after midnight, why would you hit a place, after midnight? What's the expectation? Yeah, people asleep. Now, here's the thing. In my opinion, if I'm kicking in the front door, I'm probably under the assumption no one is home. The difference being with the daytime, where the occupants were there inside of the house, they had a specific purpose. They believed that there was illicit monies that were being stored upstairs, and they were directing to it. So the second one, my assumption is they probably thought the trailer was unoccupied.
Now to that terrifying attempted home invasion caught on camera in California. 2 masked men seen kicking in a front door while a mother and her young son were inside. Now we're hearing from that mom, and it's her screams that might have scared them off. Will Reed is here with the story. Hey, Will, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Cecilia. It's a situation you prepare for as you hope it never comes. Home intruders right at your door. The Leggett family in California faced that situation recently, but the family's preparation, a doorbell camera, could be what saved them.
It's the attempted break-in caught on camera. Watch as this would-be intruder knocks several times in broad daylight. When no one answers, he pulls up his mask and another burglar joins in and they try to break into this California home. Darren Leggett had just pulled out of the driveway.
When they saw me pull out to take my oldest to Amador Valley, they went, huh, they're gone. No one's there. It's an empty driveway.
But the house wasn't empty. Inside was Darren's wife Andrea and their young son.
I didn't know what it was. Half the house was shaking because the way they were trying to force themselves inside the house.
Once the burglars bust the door open, to their surprise, Andrea's standing right there. Doorbell and other in-home cameras have captured crime attempts before. These gadgets have spotted porch pirates, escaped convicts, even a kidnapping. A 2016 study conducted by the Los Angeles Police Department claimed in one neighborhood that the presence of a Ring doorbell camera was associated with as much as a 42% drop in burglaries. Ring, recently acquired by Amazon, has ties to more than 400 law enforcement agencies across the country, sharing video footage from customers' doorbell cameras to help solve crimes. Even though the Leggett family has cameras, 2 dogs, and an alarm system, burglars still made their way into the seemingly empty home.
It's when they get no answers that they go forward with the burglary.
Nothing was taken from the home, but the police department has offered to do a sweep.
So, just looking at those kind of snippets of previous incidents, does it elicit a response from you? No, nothing?
Angers you off.
Yeah. So, the first stat that I pushed out there was what in regards to home invasions in the United States? Yeah, just over 1 million a year, home invasions. Now, breaking it down, burglaries as opposed to robberies, a burglary is looking at every 15 seconds. So how many burglaries have just happened, since we've started this class? All right, pretty significant. Look at the times, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Now, here's the thing. These statistics came out pre-COVID. So I'm gonna throw that out there. Why do I make that annotation? Yeah, because what used to be the regular work hours for Joe and Jane Citizen was 8 to 5, 9 to 5, 8 to 4, 9 to 4, whatever. It was during that time frame most people were gone. The last video, the husband, the father had stated, yeah, they watched me drive away, and I think they assumed nobody was home. All right. How many of us work during the day at home? I've been teleworking from home for the last year and a half. For me, I'm not typically hanging out in my office, with my kid on and, strapped and ready to rock. Half the time I'm not even wearing pants because they're only seeing me from the waist up anyway. And I was like, screw it, I'm going to leave my pajamas on. But you start looking at people who are home during those hours. If you have family members, wife, young kids, spouse, maybe you take care of older family members, who are home there during the daytime. These are things that we want to be aware of because what was prior to maybe this morning, what was the assumption when these things would happen? When do these invasions, these bad things in the home happen? Yeah, everyone's like, oh, okay, well, that's at night. That's where I have to be. That's why when I sleep, I've got my sidearm right there next to me because that's when the bad people come. And now you're looking at it and you're like, oh, crud, majority of them actually happen during the daytime. So is that going to change kind of maybe my plan of action? How many of us during the day, we're typically kind of relaxed, but maybe at night you're like, oh, okay, hey, if I hear a noise, that's when I go on alert. But if you hear that noise during the day, are you as alert, right? Do you go right from kind of condition white to condition red? When you saw the first video where the 2 women were just like, okay, there's people running in the house now. Like it almost seemed staged to me, like their reaction wasn't genuine until the one woman started getting hit, and then all of a sudden it was like a switch got flicked. things that can help us, because when we start talking about statistics, one of the things we want to start looking at is, okay, these bad things are happening. How do I fight that? How do I prevent that? Well, when we talk about targets, that's one of the first things we need to evaluate our homes, where we live. You know, what kind of target is this? One of the best trainings I ever received years back in regards to terrorism is they had us play the role of a terrorist. You know, they had us go through all this training and look at how people operate in other parts of the world and the bad things they do. And then they go, okay, you're now going to create an event. You're going to target an area, a place, a structure, and you're going to come up with a plan. And what that forced me to do is see things from a different perspective. And that helped me identify weaknesses. You need to start looking at your homes in that same fashion. And I would even expand this beyond homes. Where do you spend a lot of your time? You know, if you have your own personal business, you know, commutes, kind of, you know, things that we had talked about yesterday, you know, where do we spend a majority of our time? So when we start looking at our homes as these potential targets, what are the things that deter and what are the things that attract? So when you see some of the things here on the screen, what else comes to mind as far as what might attract bad actors?
Trash. Put out boxes of large TVs out in front of your home.
Yeah, because this time of year is the worst case for that, because, you know, if you celebrate the holidays, Christmas, you know, and you're like me, as the kids are unwrapping presents, I was like, give me that paper, give me that. I'm going to get this crap out of my house. You know, and then at the trash pickup, oh, here, there's the box, you know, for an Xbox or whatever, or gaming system or electronics. You know, once your kids hit a certain age, it's never like cheap stuff. Social media, why? What do you mean by that?
People bragging. Hey, Tommy got, $1,900 and
Okay.
got TVs and guns and
Yeah.
cameras.
Yeah, that's another big issue people have. It's like, hey, you know, we're so excited for the big trip, going on the cruise next week. You know, you won't see me on social media because I'm going to be living at large in the islands for the next, you know, from this date to this date. Now, I'm going to leave the house at this hour. Oh, and, you know, there's no dog at home and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that's a huge issue. Now, with that being said, does that mean, oh, drop all social media? Is that the solution? Yeah, there's nothing wrong with taking lots of pictures, and then when you come back, you go, oh, it was a great trip, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's one option. Oh, well, I control everyone who I'm in touch with on social media. Right? No, I mean, you chose your Facebook friends, right? Or your snappers or chatters or whatevers. What? No? Yeah, I mean, I think my personal Facebook page, I have a couple hundred people. You know, I ran into one guy at a gun shop not too long ago, and he's like, oh, hey, we're Facebook friends. And I was like, yeah, guy, person in a shirt. Yes, we are. And then we don't know who our friends are friends with. Because a lot of times with our social media settings, we think they're closed and things are only shared with friends, but you might have somebody who shares something else or they have access. So we need to be aware of those. What are some other ways that we could kind of create deterrence? Well, let's look at it this way. What are some other weak points?
Physical points or access or entrance that's easily to get to but hard to see from anywhere else.
Okay.
Back door with around it, but the
Okay.
back door is close.
Yeah, that would be another one. Somebody? Low windows, another good access point.
Poor lighting.
Yeah, poor lighting. You know, especially we start talking about things that happen at night, which then leads us to deterrence. Okay, well, one of the things when I was with the police department, a couple of us would be tasked with, hey, could you meet with this neighborhood watch group and talk through how they can, be more proactive. And I went through a class, and it was everything from how to landscape. What are some things that you could do that not only make your house safer from fire, but from break-ins? And you had already addressed, like, hey, we want to make sure that shrubbery isn't blocking this window from people who might drive by on the road, right? Because if I get behind the bush, now I can fiddle with the window and I have an access point and no one else driving by would notice. Even things like changing out what you have as far as shrubbery, bushes around your house, and choosing things like holly bushes, things that have needles, that you're not going to want to be in contact with, all right, or aggressive landscaping, if you will. Avoiding large dogs. I don't have an exceedingly large dog. Mine's only like 50-some pounds, but she is a pit bull, and she's loud. Now, what people don't know is she will lick you to the point where that's how you will submit before biting you. But anything she doesn't know, she just sounds like a terror. So that's good. Motion-activated lights are also good. What was something that was addressed in one of the news videos? Yeah, cameras are being very prevalent. I just recently, joined that bandwagon with the Ring doorbell, which my wife and daughter hate. But, it's one of those things that people are recognizing. And even somebody who might not have a malicious intent, as they come up to the front door, they're like, oh, okay, I'm on camera. Let me get my good side. But what that helps us is those who might be casing. Some of you might live in a neighborhood where you've had folks come up to the door. I was like, hey, would you like to donate to this cause? Or, hey, I've got this landscaping business. Could I mow your yard? When you saw the two individuals who were kicking in the door, what did they do first? Yeah, they knocked, right? Hey, is anybody home? I've had situations where real aggressive knocker, because again, I've been working from home for a while. And, I come to the front door and the guy kind of takes a step back. And immediately as I'm looking at him, he's got teardrop tattoo. He's got a spider web here and, this and that. Well, I just happened to... doing whatever. I have this old Blackwater t-shirt that I, was kicking around in. And he steps off my stoop and he starts, it's like, hey, we're doing some landscaping estimates, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, hey man, where'd you do time? And he kind of looked at me. He's like, what do you mean? And I was like, with your ink there. I was like, were you here at one of the local jails or did you do something upstate? And he just kind of looked at me. He's like, you a cop? And I was like, what do you think? And he just walked away like that was done. It was over at that point. Because a lot of times, now here's the thing. My wife would be upset with me for that exchange because she's like, you don't know what his intent was. He could very much have just been wanting to better himself, which she's exactly right. Now, I look at it like I didn't say or do anything that necessarily was offensive, but I see somebody who looks like a duck, who walks like a duck, and I called them a duck. Now, if they don't identify as one, so be it, and we just part ways. But those are some things, those exchanges that kind of help set the stage, if you will. Our big challenge, yes?
So if I'm home alone, I typically will not open the door the first time. So then I'm setting myself up to be.
So that's one of the things that I do like about the Ring doorbell is that my wife or, if my mother-in-law is staying with us or even my daughter, she can get on the camera, not open the door, and actually answer. It's like, hey, if you need a package, do you need to talk to my father? Do you need to talk to my husband? I can greet him and, oh, no, okay, everything's good. So we've already kind of got a plan, if you will, using that. So that's been one of the benefits. And we originally got it for my mother-in-law who lives alone in Jersey. Her house is on a main road, and she was getting a lot of that kind of, hey, you need some landscaping help. Hey, you need this. And so that allowed her to be able to engage with people without breaching that first barrier, right? Opening the door that somebody could then work their way in. How many of you have ever dealt with a pushy salesperson? Yeah, and I've had those situations to where I've opened the door and they are trying to essentially get into the front of my house. You know, now me, I tend to have an abrasive personality, and so that doesn't necessarily go the way they intended. But I could certainly see, especially an older person or someone who might not have the same physical stature, would just go, oh, I'm sorry, because they're polite, right? Most of us have been raised to be polite and, oh, okay, yeah, hey, I guess you can come into my living room and throw dirt on my carpet and vacuum it, whatever. So to come back to your point, that was another reason why I like the Ring. I'm not selling rings. I wish that they didn't need to be necessary, but I found that now that I have it, I have a lot more comfort. In fact, I know that my daughter's boyfriend left my house last night at just after midnight, which is a little peevy, because it alerted me on my phone, hey, someone's there at your front door. So, yes, yeah, and there has been some nice stuff because they do a neighborhood watch through the Ring doorbell, so they figure out other rings that are around you. So if there's been like a lost dog, we did have a suspicious vehicle that was tooling the neighborhood, but it turned out it was just somebody, once again, like a fundraiser thing, But here's where it comes down to the challenge that we face as homeowners. Castle versus prison. I made mention as just what I've observed driving the area the last 2 days, man. We have these huge, elaborate gates, right? So it's almost like a fancy prison. It's a gilded cage, if you will. But I can see that being a deterrent for somebody who might have a malicious intent. If I was driving down the road looking for a target, I'm probably going to want to focus on the house. Driveway goes back, so if I park back there, no one notices driving, up and down the road. But we certainly don't want to present that. I mean, most of us don't want to present a house that looks like a fortress. Me, yes, I'd have a moat if I could get away with it, But in fact, I live in a residential neighborhood, and when I stand on my back deck, there are 8 other yards that I can look into, and I hate my life. But that's the reality that I'm dealing with. So it's a balancing act, right? When we start thinking about things that we can do within reason, lighting is probably your first and foremost. Now, I know we talked about these burglaries are happening more time the day, but we're going to big picture, and then we're going to focus down a little bit. So lighting is good. It also helps people believe that there are others home. How many of you have like smart plugs in your houses? Yeah, I'm to remove any kind of shadows. Decorative lighting has been all the rage for the last few years, right? Where you have the solar spotlights that kind of illuminate trees in the front yard. What's nice is when they are pointing at different areas. Look at the top image there. To me, that's a really pretty house, But from a protection standpoint, I'm looking at I don't see a single blind spot that isn't illuminated, So if I was, our hooded actor there at the bottom, I'm probably not going to target that house, even though to me it looks money, like there's probably some wealth in there. Fortifying front doors. What does that mean? What do you envision when I say fortifying your front door?
Make it harder to come through.
Okay, but how? How would I do that?
Yeah, lock, deadbolt, metal, long screw threshold plate.
So, Yeah, so what we're talking about, I mean, obviously you look at your front door. If you look at your house, where you live, if you have a front door and a back door, whether it's a house, a townhouse, some of you, if you live in an apartment, you might only have one entry and exit point, especially if you live like on second, third, fourth floor. But if you were in, let's say, a residence, stick-built home, front door, back door, which do you think typically is more secured? Yeah, front door, most of the time we see a knob lock and a deadbolt, right? That's kind of the builder grade base. There are things that we can do, some people are already referenced. When we start talking about, I'm keeping the door as is. Now, obviously, of the two between this door and this door, which would be preferred? Yeah, something solid, you know. Some of us might have side lights, you know, which are just the panels of glass on either side of the front door. Are those an issue? Depends on where your lock is. Yeah, exactly. So if you had two doors here and the locking was center and the side lights were here, it would be very difficult for somebody to break a panel and reach across. But if the side light was here, it's feasible they could break it and reach across. Yes?
A little fun fact, that door, the window's out.
Yeah.
Somebody broke into here.
It's great for lighting,
Yeah.
right? Really illuminates the space. But unfortunately, security-wise, it's an issue. So small things we can do, and some of you already referenced, is reinforcing the frames of the doors, specifically the contact points, the hinges. Anybody with construction knowledge, basic builder level, replace the door. All right, what is the length of screws typically on the hinges for a door? Yeah, I mean, 1 inch, and you look at a hinge plate, typically there are 3 screws, sometimes 4 on either side. And what you're looking at is, of those 3 or of those 4, many of them, let's say 75%, are ½ inch. And then you've got maybe one that's an inch, kind of the anchor point. One benefit is, if you look at how homes are built, door frames, it's not just a 2x4, but we're talking about stacked 2x4s around the frame. What you have is the ability for, let's say, a 2 or 3 inch screw to go much deeper into that structure that's reinforced. Why are door frames reinforced? Any thoughts?
Has to support the weight above it.
Support the weight above it, yes.
Yeah, open span. So it's
Open span. What else?
stress.
Yeah, because you're opening and closing that door repeatedly, thousands upon thousands of times the life of the home. So not only is it supporting the weight here above, which is why we have any kind of cross beam to span, but also because of that force being slammed, those of us with kids, you know, it's 1,000 times in a day. So all of that is reinforced. If we can take benefit in that by, instead of using the smaller screws, that's a short-term solution. Now, obviously, we start looking at front doors. There's a difference between interior doors and exterior doors. Although I've hit houses where interior doors were used as exterior doors, which is against code. But instead of doing something large in glass, which is very ornate, very beautiful, what are some other options that we could look at? Steel, all right. And there have been huge improvements in that. What else?
I don't know what they're called, but I have them where they come over and they engage and stuff. So you have to pull that out and over. And what I do is I put one up top and one at the bottom, so they're kicking. They ask them, you know, if this person's there.
Yeah, a lot of times what you have is the ability, there are throws that'll go high and low. Just from my experience breaching doors, I learned a lot from firefighters on how to get quickly through doors because, you know, of their focus. So one of the things when I was working as breacher for our team, actually here, this door would be a good option. Let's do this. We'll do this. If you can just turn your attention back here for a second. All right, so if we look at, these are the two contact points, right? Why wouldn't I go to the hinges if I was kicking the door? Yeah, and there are 3 contact points. So here, 2, and they're close together. So when you start thinking about breaching that door, this is where typically people are kicking. Now, I get it. It would make more sense to bust the glass, reach through, and just undo it. But let's envision this is just a solid door, all right? So this is where they're going to target. So what are things that I could do to reinforce this area? Because here's the reality. These are the only 2 items that are protecting us, right? This little piece of metal here, this little piece of metal here. So what could we do if replacing the door isn't an option, right? Because I could say, oh, hey, I want one of those, all metal doors. Now I'm looking at $2,000 plus, not including installation. That's not a fund that I can just freely give out. So what could I do to deal with these small little pieces of metal that are the only thing protecting me in mine?
You put a steel sleeve on it.
So there's that option. If you go to your home supply companies, there are actually metal sleeves that'll help reinforce this. What that's doing is it preventing the wood from splintering and allowing that to be released. The same thing with the receiving plates. Remember we had talked about doing deeper screws in the hinges? The same thing could be done here. You also have the option of replacing, instead of 2 individuals, you could do a much larger span that will, once again, help distribute the force. These are relatively easy fixes without changing the integrity or structure of the door. All right? We're looking at what are quick solutions because most of us can't just go, oh, I'm going to replace that door tomorrow. Other things that are available, we talked about video doorbells. One of the benefits is we've seen neighborhood-wise, there's been a 40% decrease in a lot of the crimes. Now, when we talk about drop-in crime, it's pretty broad. What we're talking about are the porch pirates. It includes the burglaries, but also the porch pirates, also the vehicle break-ins. How many of you in your neighborhoods and areas have had those folks who have gone into unlocked cars and stolen electronic items? Big pet peeve of mine are when firearms are stolen. It was like, why were you leaving guns in your vehicle, right? Heaven forbid that they were unlocked. What about alarms? Do you have to have the actual alarm? What does that slide say? Signs. Because here's the thing I want you to think about. Unless you were specifically targeted, right? I have an issue with Tony Hunter, and I know he has something I really, really want. Then yes, I'm going to focus on his residence. But outside of that, I'm just casing neighborhoods and going, okay, what's easy? What can I get and get away? These are not supervillains we're talking about, folks. All right? Look at the first video where you had the guy who was like sort of trying to do the mask. All right? Yeah. Well, they probably didn't even look or notice that the camera was there. Yeah. Well, that's a valid point. So we're not dealing with, the Einsteins and the Lex Luthors. Instead, it could be simple solutions. And I know just going to different Home Depots and Lowe's that you can very easily just buy house protected by blah, blah, blah. Now, don't do the house protected by Smith & Wesson sign, which I know is quite popular. But, that's something that it's not the end-all be-all, but certainly helps. This is one of the things I always like to address because for those rare circumstances, and it was something that was brought up earlier, well, what if somebody comes to the door and I'm home? Or I hear that noise outside and I'm home? Too many times I'll have folks go, well, that's why I have my license and that's why I do this and that's why I carry that. Great. But here's the problem that I foresee. What's the last statement? Yeah, guarantee. Now, I like to think it's like, man, I got my stuff, right? I'm going to jock up and we're going to hit this puppy. We're going to take him down hard. The bravado's all well and good until, I step outside, I twist my ankle, and next thing you know, somebody's got the drop on me or something bad happens, right? I've chosen to put myself into that situation. Whereas inside the residence, I know I have that secure area. Think of it for those who were in class yesterday. Who at the end of the day am I overall responsible for? Me, family. That doesn't include possessions. And that's one of the hard facts. You're like, my 68 Mustang is out there in the driveway, and I'm hearing that was glass. Somebody is breaking glass out there, and I just dropped 10K into this puppy and blah, blah. You still have to recognize kind of what's the priorities, all right? Don't put yourself out there thinking that you're going to win the fight when you have no idea really what the fight is. Some other things that can be a challenge for us, we might live in a decent neighborhood, or at least when I moved there, it was pretty decent, and then things change, the economy changes, people move, and now, there's some other issues that I need to address. I would love to live in a rural location, right? That's my goal in life, is at some point have a minimum of 20 acres around me, and then everyone else have 20 acres or more to themselves. So if I want to stand on the back deck and urinate and not worry about it, then that's what I'll do. But what's one of the negatives of living in such a rural area? Yeah, if something bad happens, right, I'm pretty much off on my own. Now, throughout the years, moving around the country, I've had circumstances where I've lived in less than ideal locations. At one point I was like living in a basement of an old kind of crack house. Not that it was a crack house per se, but it had a crack-essence. But those are things that I can't control, right? I do have a crappy neighbor who lives in my neighborhood. It sucks, but I don't have the ability to chase them out of Dodge, right? But I need to be aware of who comes and goes there and just recognize I'm probably not going to advertise, like somebody mentioned earlier, when I go out to the trash, hey, look, I just got this 70-inch television, or I just got this Blu-ray player, and blah, blah, blah. Because even though my neighbor might be sketch and they might not necessarily come to my house, who visits them, right? Like tends to hang with like. So if I've got a crappy neighbor, they've probably got even crappier friends who are showing up at all hours of the night. So we need to be aware of that. What I want you to start looking at is where you live is, think of it as a target, all right? And where would be the weak points? And what are things that you can change, you can adjust for, but at a minimum, recognize that those weak points exist and that they're on your radar. Some common scenarios that we've seen, we already talked through. Daytime break-ins are just typically that. It's a smash and grab. They're going to run in, grab whatever is of value, typically electronic items, and anything that's overtly displayed that might seem valuable. In your bedrooms, why would I come into your bedroom? Yeah, I'm gonna look for, and I'm just gonna grab that. Now you saw those two jokers kick a safe down the stairs. Obviously it wasn't too heavy, but that's something else, because in your fire safes, we have a small, a briefcase kind of one, a fire safe. What do you typically keep in those? Yeah, valuables, important documents. Yeah, if you have any kind of financial paperwork, it could be stocks, bonds, things of that nature. So something that is secure tells me there's something of value in it. So be aware of what you have accessible. The other thing is, think about when you this collection of firearms. That's awesome. And then, one of my wife's friends comes over and I show the husband, hey, look at what I got here. I mean, he's cool. I mean, he's an accountant. Like, I don't think he's going to kick my door in. But he's talking to somebody else. He's like, oh, yeah, one of my wife's husband's friends, yeah, he's got all these guns in there. And I mean, it's just they're just laying out like in his office. I mean, it looks really cool. It's kind of badass. But I don't know what the intent is of that other person. So also be cautious of what we like to share. When I say share, show off, because that is a human trait. Like, hey, I got this huge big screen TV and the sound system and everything else. Be wary of that. Nighttime burglaries, typically it's the weakest point of the structure. We already talked about front doors are oftentimes more reinforced than back doors. I can't tell you how many warrants we'd go on and the initial plan is like, oh, we're going to breach the front door. And I'd go, hey, just looking at the pictures, that's a sliding glass door in the back. Why don't we go through that? They're like, whoa, what do you mean? I go, well, the front door has a screen door and then a deadbolt lock. The sliding glass door, all I got to do is take a window punch to the corner and the entire thing disappears and we can stroll through. Too wide if we want to. And they're like, yeah, we could do that. We could do that. But that's something else that folks don't think of. I can tell you growing up, we have a sliding glass door and my parents always had the broomstick in there, right? Because that's going to secure it. Except when you just take like a spark plug, you throw at the glass and the whole thing and everyone just strolls through. So you've got to look at, okay, your security measures, do they really make sense, in the grand scheme of things? Car break-ins, typically what we'll see are like juveniles, druggies who are going in there looking for cash, small items that they could pawn quickly. And then targeted victims are very rare occurrences, right? Like I talked about going after Tony and, what fancy stuff he's got. That is very less common. So on the prevention side, some things, if you decided to invest in steel core doors are great, especially steel door and steel frame, but you're paying for that. Now, side benefits, insurance, those are fire-rated doors, so what you've got is possible insurance discount. Also, same thing with loss, from burglaries. We talked about increasing the length of the door screws, security system, doorbells, video doorbells, and exterior lighting. All of these are options available, and some less expensive than others. So we've done all of that, hardening the outside of the structure. Now we want to start talking about indoors, and let's say something bad does happen. What is our plan? So we're going to create a plan, talk about safe rooms, equipment, and high-risk areas. So first off, creating a plan. One, how many of you have some kind of plan? If something bad were to happen, okay, a couple people, all right. Now, how many of you have a fire drill plan? All right, and how many of you practiced that this month? Okay, so you have a plan, but as far as the practice aspect goes, well, I mean, I've got a plan. How many of the family members, like in my mind, it's just the three of us now. My son's moved on. It's the Army's problem now. But I'm only responsible for three of us, not including the dog. And if something happens, I've had discussions, but I haven't practiced jack squat with anybody. Is that good enough? Is that reasonable? It's one thing to talk through. How many of you remember when you were in elementary school and you got your fire safety class, right? The firefighters show up, they got all the cool stuff, and you got the little plastic hat, maybe a sticker, coloring book, and you're like, okay, Johnny, Jim, Susie, come up with your fire escape plan, and then take it home and practice with your family. And you were like all shiny, and you show up, and you're like, hey, we're going to practice. And your dad's like, yeah, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. it's all well and good to come up with these plans, even to talk through these plans, but we need to start looking at the what if aspect. Now, does that mean tonight I want you to go home, grab a rubber duck, a toy gun, and start clearing rooms and hallways and everything? No, you don't have to do that. Instead, what I would simply suggest is just walking through, and if you can convince somebody in the family to just walk with you and go, hey, if this happens, what would you do? Right? If somebody is at the front door and the door gets kicked in and you're in your bedroom, where would you go? Would you stay there? All right? Do you have a rally plan? If you have smaller kids, do they know what to do? I do recognize that at certain ages, they're not going to, whatever plan you come up with, that's not going to be intrinsic to them. But we also recognize that even kindergartners know what a fire drill is at school. And they know that when the sound goes off, what to do, don't they? Because they do it every month. It's mandated federally. So there are options available to us. There is reasonable based on age and capabilities, but for me, I'm always doing the what if game. Like I mentioned yesterday, success isn't necessarily in the plan, but in the planning, and that could just be simple discussion. When you're discussing with family members, these are just some things I'm suggesting. Where do you go? What do you do? What are the situations? So thinking about where you live, what are some breach points? Front door, all right? So let's just kind of what if together as a group, all right? What's the worst case scenario? You're home, all right? And it's at a time of day when you're the least prepared, which would be when? I'd even argue middle of the night when I'm unconscious, and then I have to go from unconsciousness to holy crap, this is real. All right? So I'm using that as the worst case example. I'm not saying that there aren't other bad examples, such as during the day. All right? So let's say it's at the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, everyone was just passed out, and all of a sudden you hear this large crashing sound. Or worse, you don't hear a crashing sound, you hear a voice that you do not recognize. And suddenly, short hairs are standing up, heart rate's at 180. What happens next? All right? If you have multiple structures, like for me, bedrooms on the second floor, living room areas on the first, I'm going to say I hear voices downstairs, male voices, and I'm the only male that's supposed to be in this house, especially at 3 o'clock in the morning. So what happens next? Do I go to my daughter's room? Do I secure her? Do I bring her somewhere? Or does my wife go to my daughter's room and that's where they secure? Why am I stressing securing anyone anywhere? I know it's not them because, again, having a teenager, God, anything can happen. All right, but what else? Yeah, I want to know where everybody is, because if bad things start happening, heaven forbid that something I do causes harm to someone I care about. Because what do we know about ballistics? Let's throw the firearm aspect in. They go through walls, they go through stick-built drywall, everything. So we've got to be cautious and aware of those types of things. All right? Inside of your house, are there areas that you feel are safer than others? Are there places that they could go? All right? Just like in a fire drill. Depending on where your bedrooms are in relation to the rest of the house, is there an egress point? Non-traditional, through a window. Well, bedrooms on the third floor, that's like a 24-foot drop to the ground. That might not be an option. So these are things that I just want to start considering. Think about exits and entry points. The big thing I always stress to folks when it comes to tactics are things like layers and angles. And that's something that we're going to address here this morning. Once you find a safe place, what do you do? So let's say, let's throw this out there. Inside of your house, is there a room that you feel is your safe space? A place that you could secure, that you could ensure that if I put family members in there, that they would be protected? What are some examples that you have?
Corner bedroom.
Corner bedroom? Why do you specifically say corner bedroom?
So that there's no, I have my bedroom has to be in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
There's no windows that people can get in from there, and I can see the 2 points of entry into that room, and I can control what can go into that room.
Okay, so if you were in there protecting those behind you, you know, okay, these are the only 2 areas I have to worry about. So that's good. So it limits how dispersed your attention is, right? You're pretty focused. What are some other examples?
In my house, it's my bedroom in the back corner.
Okay.
Because there's a chain ladder
Okay.
from the second floor out, and I can control access in hallways. I have good angles
Okay.
till they're gone, and I can retreat.
Good. Now, one of the things they throw out there, do you have a communications plan? Meaning, so let's say we're in the bedroom, a lot of us don't have house phones anymore. Not saying maybe you do, but if something bad happens and I'm the protector, I want whoever I'm protecting to have comms with 911. I want them to be on the phone and go, hey, look, this is what's happening. My husband's wearing this, or my spouse or the person who's protecting me is wearing this. Why would I stress that? Because law enforcement, everybody's guilty until proven innocent, because something bad is happening and I've got to be cautious. So we certainly want to make sure that as much information can be shared to those who are coming to support us as possible. So that's just something to throw out there. It might be, hey, when we batten the hatches in here, spouse, family member, grab your cell phone and you're going to be in here. Now, I throw that out there with a cautionary tale because, once again, being an internet nerd, I noticed my daughter's cell phone was at 1%, at 1 o'clock this morning. So at 3 a.m., counting on her to be able to be in touch with 911 is probably not the best plan because she's horrible at maintaining that. So those are things we want to start thinking about. One of the things we would teach our agents for the government, the group that I worked with, is that bathrooms were something that we would typically use as our fallback point. One, they were always securable, because there are occasions you might have rooms in your house that have doors, but the doors aren't capable of being locked, right? They're just decorative doors. Whereas bathrooms typically are always capable of being locked, and there's only one entry and egress point. So if I'm protecting anyone, I know, and there might be several layers. So if it's a master bedroom with an attached bath, there's the bedroom door that can be locked and secured and braced, and then there's the bathroom door that could be secured and locked and braced. So that's additional layers internally that somebody would have to get through to get to me and mine. Where, for those who are carrying firearms, where's your firearms located in relation to where this safe space is and where everything else is going on? Some of us, I just have the gun laying on my nightstand, right? Which, depending on your home situation, could be fine. I know in Virginia, we've had laws recently passed that such a setup could get you time in jail because it's unsecured and would have access to minors, even if you don't have minors in your house. But that's something to be aware of. How about flashlights? Some of you, your personal protection firearm might have a light attached, which is great because then it's just one package, one and done. The challenge I would propose to you is this, especially when dealing with possible friendlies, family members. I don't necessarily want to scan my daughter's bedroom with a pistol with a flashlight attached. So I have a handheld light and I can search in that, and if there's a threat, I can always bring the firearm to bear. So these are things to be aware of. We talked about the communication plan, having the phone charged, and then including whoever you're living with as much as possible in these plans. All right, even it's just a matter of you've talked through the what ifs. If you're able to get out of the house, or family members are able to get out of the house, do I want them to come back in? Because, maybe your son, daughter, spouse, family member is like, hey, you didn't get out, I'm going to come help you. Why not?
Everybody points off the board.
Yeah, if I don't have to worry about more friendlies, then the bump in the night and the noise and the sound that I hear, I pretty much can just scale that to that's a threat. Whereas if I don't know where the family members are, or there's the risk that they come back in, now I've got to do the what if game, right? I can't just assume, I've got to make sure. Now, assuming anything is always a bad game to play, but if I can ensure that they're safe, that's going to be my plan. With those safe rooms, something else I want to throw out there is, do I want to run the risk of actually being trapped inside of that space? Like it's a good news, bad news situation, right? Somebody had already mentioned, hey, I've got a ladder, so even if we're in that bedroom, there is an egress opportunity. I will put out there, Amazon has had sales on, it's not Biggie, it's a fire suppression company. It's got a weird name. Kitty. Yeah, they actually had sales on the second story ladder systems, and it's almost like, just looks like a little duffel bag. It's very small. It's a little bit bigger than a shoebox, and you could just put it right there by the window, and you just simply hook the hooks there on the windowsill frame, and then just toss it out, and it's something you can use. You could even practice if you wanted. I would not put it in my teenager's room though. But, that could be something that helps give you an egress point, not just for the bumps in the nights, but also for fires as well. The goal always is putting things between me and the threat. That includes distance. That includes levels. Anything that might be able to stop bullets. What in our houses will stop bullets? Right? According to Lethal Weapon movies, the couch, the fridge door, all right, sometimes a desk. The Batman movies, I think it was a serving tray. No, what are things that are inside of your house that could stop rounds? Very limited. We're talking about things like floor joists, all right? Maybe the door frame where you have a stack of 2, 3, 2x4s. But again, very limited areas of the house, typically not your furniture, unless you've got a lot of marble stuff, which, you might. It is, a taste. We want to look at things like focusing on the fatal funnel. Is anyone unfamiliar with that term? All right. So if I was walking into your bedroom, how would I get from in the hall into your room? The doorway. All right. So if all you had to do was hold a gun at the door, and the minute anything stepped through, you could press the trigger, you can see for the person coming in, that's a bad day, yes? Because it requires no skill on my part to just hold the gun there, and the minute I see something, just start shooting. That's why we call it a fatal funnel. For us, it's specifically of concern because do bad guys care who they shoot? And oftentimes they've been known to shoot their own team members or partners, just because they honestly don't care. But for us, I need to make sure it's not a friend, it's not a family member, it's not law enforcement who's coming to my aid. So I need to be aware of what those things are and how to work around them. One of the other things when we start talking about nighttime is silhouetting. So inside of your house, typically when you go to sleep, are the lights on or off? Yeah, I mean in mine, because I pay the bills, it's like we're shutting down everything. So now, if I'm using things like a flashlight and the bad guy's in the dark, are they able to identify my location as I'm shining the flashlight and walking around? Yeah. So what could be a deterrent? Night vision, right? Yeah, well, I mean, if you got a couple grand, sure. So what would be another option?
I have lights automated like you do. I have the ability to turn on lights in different parts of the house.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong. Hey, I start flicking lights on, because here's the thing. The person who's been in the dark benefits from the dark. But for me, somebody who just woke up, and I'm like, I don't know what the hell's going on, start flicking lights on, it kind of levels the playing field. Man, I immediately get to see what's going on. So that's an option. The other is just things like proper light usage with the flashlight. We can use the flashlight as a tool to blind or even project a barrier, if you will. Have you ever been driving at night and suddenly get hit with high beams? Does that almost create a wall of light, something that you can't see beyond? So if you were the bad person, your ability to aim, focus, and engage is limited. It's a short time frame, though. So we start looking at things like equipment. So handheld lights would be good. What about a firearm? What type of firearm do you think is the best tool for home defense?
The one you most effective with.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Stop answering my questions, but it's a great answer. All right? Because I've been in these discussions, I don't want to say arguments, but discussions. It's like 12-gauge shotgun is the ultimate home defense weapon. Yes or no?
Pretty persuasive.
It is an incredibly distinct sound that is unique above all other sounds in nature is when you rack a shotgun. I don't care who you are or what limited firearms experience you have, that is a very distinct sound. And in my law enforcement career, there is one situation I de-escalated by racking a shotgun. And okay, yes, since you asked me so nicely, I will share. So when I was a deputy sheriff in a very rural community in Virginia, there was a town on the other side of the Rappahannock River from where I worked, and they had a biker bar that was there. And it just so happened that that community had like one deputy, and I was the one deputy for our county. And he gets on the radio and he's like, I need assistance, I need assistance. 1010 is a fight. I've got multiple fights, blah, blah, blah. So going from Middlesex County into Lancaster County, there's what we call the 2-mile bridge, because it's 2 miles, and I am Crown Vics top out at 140. So I'm just like, get there, and sure enough, man, this he's got his gun still in his holster, and you just see a bunch of dudes like heaving and huffing, one fight still off in the corner, and I peel in there, and I hop out, and back then, the patrol rifles, that wasn't a thing. So I had the 870 shotgun, and I get out, and I'm yelling, and people are like, F you, and I just went, and it was silence. And of course, you get a lot of that, and they start back, and that's all we wanted. At that point, no one was getting arrested because neither one of us were just like, get on your bikes, get the hell out of here. But I will admit that in that situation, that prevented me from having to really either use lethal force against somebody, because our numbers, it was overwhelmed. Within like another 5-10 minutes, other deputies from other counties, because after 11 p.m., state police, they were in bed. So, for them to respond, it was, I got to get my stuff back on, then get in the cruiser, and then, drive over the lines. So I will say shotguns, very distinct. If I was going to use one for home defense, what kind of ammunition would I use? So that's an option.
Slug.
Why?
Because precise, I can control that better than I can control the spread of buckshot or any other shot.
Okay. So double-aught buck, for those who are unfamiliar, typically 9 pellets, 32 caliber per pellet, which is a little smaller than a 9mm bullet. And as you're grouping, it's pretty tight, but once you reach a point, let's say from me to the glass doors, the pattern's going to start to open, all right? And that's where we run into concerns, because we're accountable for everything that comes out of the end. And if a 9mm round would go through that wall, well, one of those pellets will also go through that wall. What's a challenge with running slug?
Miss.
Well, both, either one is concerning, with the miss. Same thing, over penetration. But what else? How often do you practice? How many of you have fired rifled slug rounds from a 12 gauge? It is an uncomfortable experience, and that we probably aren't spending a predominant amount of time. Now, when I run shotgun classes, I'll spend the majority of the class shooting Burt, because I want the manipulation to be fast, reloads and running the shotgun, because the challenge with a shotgun is you might have 8 rounds, right? 7, depending if you have extended mag, you might have only 5 rounds in the shotgun. So you've got to be very good at reloads, whereas a pistol, I have 17 rounds or 18, and I don't even have to reload to deal with the bad actors. So there's the goods and bads. You can mount a light to a shotgun. You could even have an optic on your shotgun. Those are all. They're inexpensive compared to maybe like an AR-15 or something of that sort, or a higher end pistol. How about maneuverability? So you've got essentially a broomstick hanging out in front of you. How easy is it to navigate around furniture and doorways and hallways? That's a concern. So why not an AR-15, since we spend so much time and energy with them? There we go. Now you're starting to think, I'm assuming I'm the one who's going to save the day, right? Dudley Do-Right. You know what I'm talking about. Other people don't. I'm here to save the day, but I'm not here. So what's plan B? Is my spouse, my significant other, my children capable of doing anything with those tools? Or do I not feel safe having, obviously depending on the age of the child, deal with that? Or, my spouse is very small framed, very petite. Grabbing an 18-inch shotgun with an extended mag tube, is like this unwieldy tool that's as big as they are. So that might not be the option. So do we have a plan B? Or maybe that helps us decide what is the tool to use. Maybe the shotgun, because it works for me but not for them. So what would be a secondary tool or a better tool to use? Would an AR-15 be a good home defense weapon?
Yes.
I mean, they all have goods and bads. I'm not here to tell you that this is the one. That's not my place. Instead, it's what's going to work best for you. I just want you to think about the what ifs. To not just assume because I read a magazine article or Fancy Pants with their YouTube channel said that this is the one, and that's what I'm doing, because now my ammo choice is different. I have a hollow point that's designed when it hits something, it expands and stops, as opposed to an AR-15 where it's a rifled round that would go and continue to travel. These are things we need to start thinking about. What about protection? I know there are folks who have right next to their nightstand their weapon and body armor plates. And I'm not saying for or against, I'm just bringing up as a topic of conversation. Are there goods, bads? Are there issues with having something like that? Let's talk about that first. Is there a negative to having, let's say, body armor there next to the bed? Okay, there's that aspect. Now, here's what I'm going to counter with. The time it takes me to put it on, I'm waking up. And that's not me grabbing a gun and moving. Instead, it's me processing what's happening. Not saying that you're wrong. I think it's a very valid point. I'm just throwing out another option. Is it bad to have body armor next to you? I don't see an issue like, oh, well, you know, my 6-year-old touched it, and so now we had to have a talk. And you know, it was close. I also am not saying that, you know, okay, you know, every family member has their own body armor kit and turnout gear right next to their bed, including my 70-some-year-old mother-in-law. You know, hers is a little lighter and it's pink, but I'm not for or against. I'm simply just sharing other viewpoints that you might not have exposure to. You know, folks who are like, no, I'm doing this. And that was the point made to me, because I had the same point. I was like, you're going to take all that time? You know, bless you. I've got people who have guns mounted in their showers because they want to be able to access it, because there was a story about a guy who was in the shower and his house was broken into and he shot the intruder. So anything's possible. I just am looking for what's the justification. I'm not saying you can't do it or you shouldn't do it. Just explain to me the whys. If you can tell me the why, then I'm on board. So to that end, having it there is an option, and it might make sense in your situation. And if you have a why, as long as it's not, well, because that guy, the person that I watch on the social media stuff, does it, and they're pretty cool. You know, to me, that's a really horrible scale of decision making. Instead, you personalize it and go, this is what works for me and this is why. I've had folks go, well, yeah, and my body armor is there, and it has an identifying panel that's reflective. So if law enforcement were to show up, it at least shows something and makes them pause for a second, because they might even assume on law enforcement. Now, it doesn't say cop or police or sheriff. You know, I've seen ones that was like concealed carrier, security. There's nothing preventing you from having anything that says security on it. Like you're not pretending to be anything. It's one of the things we started incorporating for a lot of the active shooter training. Some of you had mentioned yesterday with the church groups. The one nonprofit that I'm working with, putting together protection plans for synagogues, there are little pouches that the security officers wear, and it's simply, you pull it out, throw it over your shoulder, and it's a bright red reflective band that says security on it. The idea that if something bad happened, at least the police might pause for a second, unlike the situation in California where they just saw a guy with a gun holding it on, turned out to be the bad person, and they got shot. So these are just some things thrown out there. The last is the person told me, well, on their body armor is a first aid kit. And if I throw that on and I were to come down into the first floor and, you know, heaven forbid that one of my family members was hurt, I'd have those first aid supplies right there as I waited for the ambulance to show up. Because I live in a rural environment and it's a volunteer squad that it's like a 20-minute response time. And so I wanted to have everything there. These are just reasons why. As long as you think about what works for you and you have justification, I'm not here to deny you those choices. Now, what we will get into are some challenges to maybe what your initial game plan was or is. All right? Specifically, things like castle doctrine, stand your ground, and self-defense shooting. So, castle doctrine, if you're not familiar, well, first off, how many of you have heard castle law? All right? Okay, for those that have, what do you know it to be? What does it mean?
In standard castle doctrine states, you don't have to attempt to retreat, and in many states, you may use castle doctrine not only to protect yourself, but your immediate property.
Okay, yeah, I think that surmises it pretty well. So, when we talk about castle doctrine, we are envisioning our homes are the castle. All right? And we're going to talk through it. Well, with castle doctrine, castle law, you do not have to leave your residence, right? Your legal residence. This is a key thing that some people misconstrue. And I'll actually talk through a case where someone was visiting someone else and bad things happened, and that bit him in the ass. But you're at home, and someone uses force to come into your residence. You are not required to leave your residence, right, to avoid the situation. You have the right to stay there and defend yourself.
So is there a difference between that and stand your ground?
Yes. So looking up here, we can talk about things like an occupied place, vehicle, or home, and that you have the ability to use force to defend yourself against an intruder. All right? So with Maryland, because again, this is the state in which we're in, is when a person is inside their home, they do not have to retreat. Okay? Which I'm sure you probably cover ad nauseum, for those who are getting their concealed carry licenses. As long as the use of force is reasonable, and this is where people tend to get hemmed up. One, we've had situations to where it's someone I've invited into my home, and it could be alcohol, we're watching the game, we get into an argument, and things turn violent, and now all of a sudden, the scales have changed, right? To that end, I can use force up until the point where they're no longer a threat to me. And this is where, especially when alcohol is involved, I throw a punch at Tony and, because my football team lost and he punches me back and I go down to the ground and he's like, no, screw you, this is my house, and just starts kicking me. He's expanded beyond the necessary use of force to stop that. And now it's become almost where you went from being the good guy defending yours to being the bad guy, being the aggressor. Maryland also has a duty to retreat law if you are outside of your home. So somebody had mentioned earlier this morning about, Tony, I think with the fence lines and how Maryland law is, there's a difference between inside of the home and curtilage. It's a legal term we would use in writing search warrants. If I was going after a drug dealer and I wanted to be able to search their home and curtilage, that's anything, so vehicles that might be parked on the property, I have the ability to check all of those things. When you talk about Maryland, that doesn't give you the right to go outside of the house. So let's say you have the barn, or you have a detached garage, or you have vehicles, and you're going to go out there and confront somebody there. At that point, they're stating that you are good inside the house, but the minute you step outside, you're no longer protected under castle doctrine.
That thing's kind of goofy the way it's written. The homeowner is allowed to stand their ground and attempt to defend themselves against an intruder. Well,
In their home.
so burglary and robbery, so if a guy's coming into your house, he's coming in to rob you of something. He's not there to harm you, but he wants to take your stuff. So how do you defend that?
So that you are able to defend with an appropriate level of force. That doesn't rise to necessarily deadly force. That's the challenge. Now, how can we Because I see where you're going with this, right? Somebody big and bad just kicked in the door and I'm coming at you.
Different story.
Now it's how do you go, oh, I was in fear for my life and my safety. I gave them commands. I presented the firearm. They aggressed towards me. I felt I had no other option other than to use the level of force necessary to stop them. So it's a little bit of,
And then if you're outside the house and you confront them, you have to remove yourself if you can. But if they then catch you in a building in a corner,
I get the
then-
outside.
Yeah.
But I know some attorney, if I shoot some guy in my house, I'm defending myself.
Mhm.
Either way, that's the dead guy can't talk, obviously. But I
True.
know I'm gonna have some lawyer or some state prosecutor
Yeah.
trying to jam it down my throat. I could've got out of my house.
now, that can't be the counter argument, is that you could have left the house because, again, that's in violation of the Maryland law for a castle doctrine. But what I have heard is you could have used something else. It did not rise to lethal force. You could have shot them in the leg, right? You could have wounded them. You could have given them a warning. Any number of things. Here's the thing, just like yesterday, anyone could sue anyone for anything. Just because you're challenged doesn't mean that you failed or you're in the wrong. Unfortunately, because of political climates, you could see yourself facing prosecution, which is why I would encourage things like U.S. Law Shield, USCCA.
I have that.
Yeah.
I'm just throwing scenarios. First,
Sure, that's why we're here.
I mean, that's why I got it. I'm not saying a damn word.
Yeah.
I'm just calling them. I get that, but I'm just throwing scenarios out
Mhm.
to see if you've ever been presented with that or have heard of that.
Sure. So I'll throw a couple cases out at you. I find it funny when I do this class in Virginia. The assumption is Virginia's a pretty gun-friendly state compared to Maryland. All right, in Virginia, I can have a 100-round magazine in my pistol if I wanted to. Open carry, concealed carry, permitless carry, whatever. We're all's good. And you would assume that, oh, wow, you guys are probably, pro-gun on the court system, blah, 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 and that's not the case. There have actually been cases in California with home defense worked better in the homeowner's case than in Virginia. I'll give you two examples. One was a woman who was a victim of domestic violence for an extended period of time. And I was beating her. And finally, at one point she had been beaten. He got drunk, passed out, and she came, shot, and killed him. So you were like, oh, okay, well, that's justified. I mean, she'd been the victim of violence, but what turned out is you could have left, right? The threat was no longer present. It was a questionable situation, but it was a friend was invited over to this woman's trailer, and her ex showed up and started threatening him. And it was like, I'm going to kick your ass. I know you're cheating on me with him, and blah, blah, blah. We're broken up. And, he, swings at the guy. Wasn't a major hit. The guy backs off. He's like, hey, I've got a gun. Back off. And the guy's like, F you. Comes at him. He pulls out, shoots him, kills him. And you're like, okay, well, it's justified. He warned him. No. Whose residence was it? So he wasn't protected under castle doctrine. This was not his to protect. He should have and could have left. And allegedly, the prosecutor's like, that would have de-escalated the situation. Lethal force would not have been necessary. So there are different situations. I always come back to the best way for me to explain any situation is reasonable person rule. And the idea is, in the same situation, what assumptions would a reasonable person come to? If I was in my house, minding my own, the door got kicked open, a guy comes in, or multiple, and they start grabbing stuff and threatening me, and I'm like, get out of my house, and they coming towards me, and I have a firearm, and I used it, A reasonable person would be like, I was in fear of my safety, right? I was in fear of my life. I had to use the appropriate level of force to repel said intruders. Now, prosecutor could be like, no, you could have done this, done that, because Monday morning quarterbacking is easy, isn't it? You're not in the moment, you're not under duress, you're not under threat. Anyone and everyone's going to stand back and go, oh, you could have done a dozen different things. It's not perfect. It's just we need to be intelligent on where those limitations are and be prepared for the what ifs.
And elect better lawmakers.
Well, there's always that. Yeah, come up with more definitive laws. So to build off of that, State versus Faulkner principles, this kind of goes into the self-defense aspect. And this is what they're looking for. So if it was just me and him, well, where's the proof in all of this? Where do you think?
This is outside the home?
No. This is, we're still talking about, self-defense.
Where's the proof in it, you said?
Yeah, so if it was just two of us,
You're the proof the guy's dead.
so it now comes down to statements that are made, utteраtions. These are things we need to be cautious of or aware of, which is why a lot of these groups tell us what? Yeah, you don't have to say anything, right? Lawyer's going to come in. But I like having this up there because, here in Maryland, this is something that specifically tells you when we're talking about self-defense, and it's inside, outside, all the ways around, what is it that's going to protect us and validate us as utilizing lethal force for self-defense?
So wherein lies the law? So when, I know police are told, I'm assuming police are told because we're told, you pull a gun on somebody, it's not to maim them, it's to stop them, to kill them. So I'm just trying to figure out wherein lies the law or prosecution's defense that say, well, you could have shot him in the leg.
Sure.
So what, now the guy's going to come after me because I've disabled him now? I mean, that's kind of stupid.
Yeah, and I would agree. So here's,
You say you were aiming for the leg.
yeah, well,
I mean, I know there's 1,000 things you could say,
Sure.
but that's all I'm looking for is some, this is your field, I don't know.
yeah, so let's look at it first from the law enforcement perspective as one point of view, and then we'll transition over to the civilian point of view. So on the law enforcement point of view, just like many of you have been taught, we're going to utilize lethal force until the threat is neutralized. We don't say we kill, they're dead, so the threat is neutralized. And it's a very generic terminology, and one that I would strongly encourage others to use. Because the minute you say kill, then there's some intent there that's of a concern.
In fact, that was just proved with the shooting with the mistake between the Glock and the taser. The reason her sentence was so bad is on the witness stand, what did you do? Instead of saying, I defended myself and the officers, my fellow officers, I shot to kill. That went towards motivation, and that stepped her charging up one level.
Yeah. And words matter, all right? And so that's just, it's one thing, and again, we're Monday morning quarterbacking the what ifs, but it's good conversations to have because it gives us some really significant information to process and to chew on. So on the law enforcement side, that was one thing we had learned years back. Just like you taught to aim for center mass, if lethal force is justified, I'm aiming center mass. I'm not aiming to wound or disarm. There was a great video of a police sniper shooting a revolver out of a man's hand who was sitting, he's like in a folding chair. This is back in like the 80s, early 90s. He was suicidal, and he would hold it to his head, and then he'd point it out at the officers and hold it to his head. And it was a once-in-a-lifetime shot, and he hit it right at the hinge point, blew the gun up, didn't hurt the guy's hand, and neutralized the threat, right? That is a 1 in a million shot, and even the guy who took the shot is like, I could never recreate that in my career.
I don't know why, sorry, but are you familiar with that? I think it was Minnesota. I think he was like a congressman or something, where these kids kept breaking into his house.
I don't think so.
Yeah, okay, they kept breaking into his house and he knew it was them. He had all these cameras put in after, and I think he kept telling the police about it, and they were like, put cameras in, we'll catch him. And I think he like made another attempt, they didn't really do anything, so he knew they were coming back or something over Thanksgiving. And he waited in his basement with a rifle. When they came down the stairs, he just shot him. And he recorded it. And he was saying crazy things like, yeah, taking out the trash and like all this stuff. And he turned it into the police, thinking that he was in the right.
Yeah.
And he wasn't. Look that one up. That was.
Yeah, no, because then that goes into, it was preemptive and, yeah. Because there was a similar case, it was an older gentleman, and he kept getting his garage broken into, and he intentionally left the garage door halfway open and waited in there, and the kid came in and he shot and killed him. And it was tried as an entrapment,
Yeah,
you know.
set up. Yeah, it was like a setup.
But yes.
Does imminent danger mean I have to see a weapon?
No, it doesn't have to be a weapon, especially, and this is something I would always stress, like in women's self-defense classes, is that just size difference is an imminent threat, right? And posturing and making verbal threats, I'm going to kick your ass, I'm going to hit you, I'm going to do this, all that leads to that same definition. But coming back to my point, so there was a 1 in a million shot, and we started seeing lawyers go, you could have shot the gun out of the man's hand. You didn't have to kill him. Because this happened in this situation, and roll the footage. So to come back around to your point, what we've stressed over and over again on the law enforcement side is we never say we're killing suspects. We never say we're taking out the trash or putting people down. We've even gone away from things like law enforcement snipers, like green light, green light, green light. You know, because again, it's like you've given them authorization to kill someone. So there's been a lot of vocabulary nuance that's gone down. So with law enforcement, we're eliminating the threat or stopping the threat. And then once there, it's reevaluating the situation. A challenge that's happened in training on law enforcement is we have not done a good job for many years. If I draw my gun and now they don't have a weapon, we didn't practice what I'm doing next. It was always, you're rushing towards me with a butcher knife and I'm firing rounds and, you know, that, well, they dropped it. And I'm struggling to figure out what to do next, like I haven't processed it. You'll see this a lot on the civilian side, right? I have my gun out and my heart's racing, and that person, they drop the knife or they turn and walk away, and I'm like, no, you stop, you. And now we're seeing these cases where the individuals fired rounds, and it was like, well, what was the justification? Well, I was scared. Scared is not the same as you have an actual belief, I'm in danger, blah, blah, blah. So I bring this up because you want to start the what-ifing now and really think through anything that we do. I love having these conversations because to me that means people are thinking about the responsibility of carrying firearms, which is a discussion that does not happen enough, in my opinion. You know, instead I go to the gun store, that one looks nice, that one's pretty cool, and now I'm going to take it home and, you know, I'm protected. Not thinking about all of...
I got one.
Yeah.
See this happen all the time in my area, but you hear a noise and you look out the window and there's somebody breaking in your car.
Mm-hmm.
Try to steal your four-wheeler out of the garage.
Yeah.
They go out armed, okay, and of course by this time they either gotten away or they fire around and nobody was able to call to them.
Mm-hmm.
And of course it didn't hit the guy, but never heard the end of the conclusion on that deal.
So the challenge, let's kind of go back here. Right there, the minute they've gone out, they're not protected. And here's, if you really have a prosecutor who's anti-gun, they're going to go, you fired into an occupied dwelling, illegal discharge of a firearm in an occupied space. I'm going to end up taking your firearm, and I'm going to charge you. Because,
They're old school, and it's like somebody steals a chicken house, you walk in with a shotgun.
yeah,
pop
you know, fire a couple rounds. I got shot with rock salt as a kid. Because, you know, we were goofy kids in Halloween time in Western PA. We'd take feed corn, and it was called corning. You'd throw it at houses, and it just because everybody back then had aluminum siding.
Right.
And so it'd just be like, gah. And you'd giggle and laugh, and you'd run, and then you'd hide behind a tree, and you'd throw it. We had this one crotchety old farmer who had a shotgun next to the front door with rock salt, and I remember getting rock salt plucked out of my ass because I'm running, and it was cocoon, and you're like 1,000 bees just stung me. But that now, he would have been charged criminally. I mean, you know, I'd be sobbing in court. You know, I'd probably be driving a much nicer car now. You know, any number of things. So when we start looking at other aspects of Maryland law and criminal and judicial proceedings, according to Maryland Code, you are not liable if a person who breaks into your house, your dwelling, your place of business, if the person reasonably believes that force or deadly force is necessary to repel an attack by the individual, and the amount and nature of the force used by the person is reasonable under the circumstances. So we're coming back around to that same argument. That's the state statute 5-0808 that specifically addresses that. Now, I say specifically with an asterisk, because how much of this is actual specifics and how much of it is, oh, well, I believe this to be the case. All right, so it's still perception-based. Burden of proof, and this is one of those things when it's, let's say we've taken the bad guy and we've eliminated them on a permanent basis. Now it's my word versus the state. So where does the burden of proof lie when it comes to self-defense? Well, when a defendant claims they acted in self-defense by producing evidence to the effect of prosecution, the prosecution has the burden of proving that the defendant did not act in self-defense. So the prosecution is responsible for proving that you did not act in self-defense. And then they have to convince a jury. Because quite honestly, that's what we're dealing with, is a jury of our peers, and that's, for the most part, who's deciding these cases. Now, not to get into nuances, but you can decide, you know, no, I don't want to be tried by my peers. I want the judge to, you know, deem or make judgment on the case, whatever. So looking at this, is that good news or bad news for you, for us, as the person protecting themselves?
By statute, it would be good news, but that does tend to lately fall on who the prosecutor is and what his expectations
Yeah, that'll always play a role. But the good news for us is now I don't have to come up with the evidence. If I was being tried criminally, all right, not under self-defense, but just say they accused me of murder, the burden of proof lies on who? Who has to prove my innocence? No, what do they have to prove? Yeah, and so self-defense, we're essentially under that same umbrella, if you will. Now, I said murder, but when we say self-defense, it's like, oh, well, I don't have to prove my innocence. They have to prove my guilt, right? With the murder, well, it's actually no different than with the self-defense aspect. So now when I frame it in that way, is this that much better considering? Yeah, I mean, I look at it, and the reason why I bring this up, if I were to say, okay, I've been charged with murdering Ryan. Okay, well then, burden of proof lies on prosecution. I don't have to prove my innocence, they have to prove my guilt. Well, now it's, well, Ryan broke into my house, it was self-defense. My point is, there's really no difference between the two. We're saying self-defense, but quite honestly, you could take murder and you could plug it in there, and it's the same roles. So on the surface, it's like, oh, this is pretty good for us. That is proving that I don't have to put forth all this effort that the government or the prosecution does, when quite honestly, it's exactly the same as if you were being charged for murder. So on the surface, it looks great, but quite honestly, it isn't any better than being charged as a criminal. So highs and lows in regards to the different court cases are what they are. Why is it alerting the authorities one of those key factors when it comes to home defense? How?
The order. You want to be the first one to call so that you're the defender.
Okay. Have there been cases where the assailant has called 911? I've just been shot. Yeah, there have been plenty of situations, and unfortunately that homeowner or the person who was defending themselves made some utterance that was less than positive. I showed that mother effer. I told him I'd kick you, told him I'd kill him. But so if you are calling, and I get that it's irrational to go, okay, Matt, you want me to have a script memorized for when the worst moment of my life happens, and I call 911 to go, okay, hello, it's 911, what's your emergency? Yes, line 1, I was in fear for my life. Line 2, no. But recognize that whenever you call, or whoever calls for you, that is a recorded line that's admissible in court, and if there are utterances made, they could look less than friendly on your case. You need to be aware of that. There have been several circumstances where the 911 tape was admitted in court because a person made an utterance like, I told that mother effer I'd kill him the next time, and now that leads to, motive, possible premeditation. You had expected this to happen and had planned for it. Now, with the break-ins and things of that sort, if you were making any kind of statements on tape, we're looking for more of those neutral statements that adhere to the case law we discussed earlier, that you were in fear of your life, in fear of your safety. I thought they were going to kill me. Is there a difference between I thought they were going to hurt me and I thought they were going to kill me? Yes. Yeah. But as people, I thought they were going to hurt me, and they meant was I was in fear of my life. But when it's played for a jury, their peers, and they hear, I thought he was going or she was going to hurt me, what are their expectations? Much lower than you in the moment when the bad things were happening, as opposed to in an air-conditioned courtroom sitting, in the stands. So what can happen once everything's said and done? The aftermath, if you will. Lethal force is used. There's going to be statements made, weapons secured, because again, this is into evidence, and there is going to be an investigation. If you are found innocent in a criminal trial, you could still be sued civilly. What's the difference between criminal and civil court, other than things like jail time? There's money. Yeah? Yeah, so for criminal cases, the threshold is beyond a reasonable doubt. That you have to be guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. What about civilly? 51%. So you have to be 51% guilty. Like, for the most part, you're guilty, but not 100%. So yes, the standard is much lower. And so that's why you see things like, these criminal cases where you're like, I can't believe the person got off, or, oh, I knew they would get off, and then they lost their livelihood civilly. Well, I mean, that was, one of those circumstances that certainly, jumps to mind. When we start talking about legal, I know I'd mentioned, I don't for or against any particular group, but I would strongly suggest, that you invest in some type of legal protection, because we're seeing, especially firearms use, is very much a political pawn, and that you could find yourself, what you thought was the worst day of your life, defending your family and protecting them, is just the start of a much worser, right? Made that word up, situation, to where now your family's under duress, your livelihood. You could find yourself, your insurance, your life insurance, all those things are, person could go after. We've had situations where the burglar, robber, if you will, was wounded, and that the person who was being burgled or being robbed had to pay out because of lost wages, because the person was irreparably injured. And it could have been handled differently. Or it's just stuff. That's an argument I love. It's just stuff. It's not worth a life. Well, then, I didn't make that decision. The person who broke in made that decision, didn't they? But, again, that's not a popular opinion. PTSD. Why would it have that down here as a possible aftermath? There's been well-documented cases of people who are victims of violence, such as a break-in, a robbery, that there have been after effects. Not even talking about dealing with the legal aspect in that nightmare, but just the event itself. Kids, family members, there are folks who have talked about even years afterwards, something sparked that memory and they're still dealing with it. So I bring that up because it's not a one and done. Even on the law enforcement side, if I'm involved with a lethal force on duty shooting, before I can return to duty, what do they have me do? Any ideas? Yeah, I have to be counseled. And when I say counseled, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have done that. It's, hey, talk through your feelings. What are you feeling? No, I was totally justified. I did the right thing. It's not as clear cut like you see in the movies. Although modern movies tend to really draw it out. Like, now I got a drinking and drug problem. My wife left me. My kids hate me. Blah, blah, blah. But that's certainly an issue that we need to look at. Defense and training. We talk about soft targets, hard targets. We talked about creating a plan, practicing the plan, and getting training. Is training good or bad when it comes to defense, especially when we start talking about litigation?
Depends on your source.
That is probably the clearest statement that you will hear today. What does that mean? Well, you had just posted, one outstanding trainer on the social medias last night,
Like you said, what I like to tell people is, I first want to know how much you care before I want to know how much you know.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is a big thing. So you need to do your research to find out the background of this person. What really are they pushing here?
Sure.
Do they have an agenda, or are they teaching? Are they really teaching? Is there care in the field of what you're putting out there?
Yeah. So here's what I'm going to throw out there as kind of a devil's advocate. So you defended yours and utilized lethal force, and you killed this individual, right, who had broken into your home, threatened your family. And I'm going to find out as much as I can about you, right, weak points. Well, I noticed, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Smith, you've taken a lot of firearms training. Were you hoping this was going to happen? Well, you've taken a lot of this firearms training. Why didn't you wound them? Because, you're skilled. That's what I'm seeing, right? You've invested a lot of your personal time in doing all this training. Here's the thing. As a trainer, I'm not telling you, so don't get trained. Be ignorant. That's better. I'm just throwing it out there as a cautionary tale. Now, are there counter arguments to that? Yes. Well, you took all this training. You're exactly right, I did. And one of the things I stressed and was stressed to me over and over again in training is this was the final option, and that I did what was necessary to protect my family, myself from death, right? Because that's what was stressed to me over and over again. It wasn't, oh, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to kill somebody. That was the whole focus of the course. So there are counter arguments. Hey, the person who provided me this training is considered a subject matter expert in the field as well as in the field of use of force. And one of the things that they stressed over and over again is this is a last resort, and that I was to only use the level of force necessary to stop the threat. And so you were trained to stop the threat. Nothing more, nothing beyond, not to kill, not to destroy, to stop the threat. And that's what you shared. Seminars that U.S. Law Shield put together, and I was impressed. Like, I thought, especially in Virginia, I was like, no, I've been a cop 20-some years. I totally know this, whatever. It'd be a good review for me, good review. And I was like, wow, that's something I didn't look at from that perspective. And then referencing case law to kind of support those opinions, it really got me thinking. So I would certainly encourage. Coming back to that store scenario, and this is something we addressed yesterday with the active shooter training, is that too often I'll hear sidebar conversations, especially the gun shop talk, is folks go, man, if I was there, I would have done this, right? And it comes down to, are you responsible for doing that? If you're not, then you're putting yourself at risk. The idea is in that same scenario, okay, I see the guy holding the gun to the shop owner. I've got my concealed carry, so I'm going to come out and I'm going to pie around and I'm going to take the shot, right? I'm going to be the hero. And most of the time, I'd say, hey, you're probably justified, right? Until somebody calls it into court and goes, well, sir, why did you feel the need to do this? Because up until that point, lethal force wasn't used. It was threatened, but it wasn't used. You were the first to use the lethal force. So what was your justification? What's your authority? And you're like, well, I was Good Samaritan. I was going to save this person's life. Well, so we've got to be cautious on just what our expectations are compared to what we could be found liable for. Any questions on anything we went over here this morning? I know, I can be real doom and gloom. It's like, God bless, I'm just giving it all up. I'm going to live in a hobbit hole somewhere. All right? My big thing as a firearms trainer and as someone who carries, concealed, is that I want more and more people to be educated and trained. And that's it. I look at it like, when I go out here on the highway, they don't just hand driver's licenses over to anybody, right? And I get it, there are a lot of crappy drivers out there, and I've probably been accused of being one of them at some point for cutting somebody off or doing whatever. But I know for the most part, when I go out here on the interstate, everybody has at least met a standard, proven themselves capable, and I'm counting on that. And I would strongly encourage that same kind of mentality when it comes to the firearms ownership. I don't have a problem with people carrying, right? What do they say? An armed society is a polite society, So I just am a big proponent of training and, like we said earlier, quality training. The guy, I wish I could remember his name. Oh, yeah. Dust? Yeah. And the thing is, he's been around since the early 2000s. I remember looking into him back when, he was first getting started. He had one of those go fast boats, there, Chicago, because you got the water. And I mean, it was like a Miami's Vice advertisement. You know, he had his crew up there with their black tactical vests, the boat's black and metallic silver, and he had an H2 Hummer that was, you know, light bar and the whole nine. I mean, I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a break. I'm going to collapse the tables. We're going to mark some of the ground off. And then I want to practice some of the stuff that we're going to put into play this afternoon down on the range. So the benefit here is when I'm training new officers, team members, is that I have the ability to kind of see what everybody's doing. Now, there is a certain amount of Uncle Matt's world of imagination at play, because obviously a blue taped line isn't a wall. I'm using these tables to give you the sense of what we're talking about with doing threshold clears, which is something I'm going to kind of start out and address first. But come on over here for a second. So what I want you to notice, you can stand over here kind of where the camera is and look forward. When we start talking about rooms, now the benefit to you is that the rooms that you are clearing, are they foreign to you? Now, what was the focus of the course this morning? Yeah, home defense. So you know the layout, the structure, where the doors are, so on and so forth. What I'm going to work with you on this morning is how to utilize good tactics to clear rooms you're already familiar with. So I don't need to teach you, you know, the layout of your homes, right? One, that would just be weird, because then, you know, hopefully you'd buy me lunch or something and, you know, pet your dog, whatever. But I am going to talk through certain tools. First and foremost, I want you to notice that there's a difference in the location of doorway on this room as opposed to this room. What do you notice with doorway location? Corner fed, and this is considered center fed. That's typically the two designations of your standard rooms inside of your house. Now, there could be kind of a modified to where it's like not exactly in the corner, but offset slightly. But in the grand scheme of things, corner fed and center fed are the two general setups. Why is that important? Well, that's a great question. Glad you asked it. If you decide, you know what, it's going to be me and a family member who are going to be doing this, right? Then working with a partner, it's important to kind of know priorities of work, clearing. So we're going to work problems as an individual and also with a partner. Now, I fully understand, appreciate, you know, that you aren't going to be sharing a residence after today. Okay, so you might be partnered up, not a big deal, but now you know when you go home and you're like, you know what, I want to train up the person who lives with me because they're interested in being a proactive member of our defense. Then at least you kind of know what to talk through. So when we start looking at corner fed, center fed, first and foremost, when you come in to clear a room, what are you looking for? Yeah, and that's it, plain and simple. Now, good news for us is it's rare the occasion that I'm coming into a room and the bad guy is hiding. You know, when I'm teaching tax team members, if it's a warrant service, we've had people hide under beds, in closets, in ceilings. So we've got to check every nook and cranny. Home defense, it's pretty much, I want to make sure that I'm moving safely and engaging accurately whoever or whatever the threat is. So to that end, think of your areas of responsibility. In a corner-fed room, your big area is the far corner, right? The opposing corner. And then I want you to visualize your fan, your area of responsibility is essentially your arm span. So if I hold my arms out, right, this is 45 degrees. Think of it as probably closer to 60 degrees. Why would I say 60 degrees? Why not 90? Yeah, so if you stand at where you're right now and just make sure you've got space, stare at a point straight ahead and move your arms apart until where you stop seeing your hands. All right? And that pretty much is the limit to your peripheral. Are you a lizard? Because you're like arms are back here, and I was like, I can still see them, which is great. You know, for me, mine is more limited. So, you know, I'm short of that 90 degrees. Well, we use that as a starting point. The idea being that when I step through this doorway, I don't want to stare directly at a wall. I want to put my peripheral vision really to work. Because right now, there's a wall here, so I'm not utilizing any of my vision here, and I'm limited. So I'm going to turn so I can see all of that. All right? Center-fed room is a little different. You come into the center of the room, so immediately, boom, you're at full advantage. Now, I understand and appreciate inside of these rooms, they're probably not vacant, are they? I mean, there's all sorts of stuff, and we're going to talk through being able to navigate around those things. But that's going to be a priority. Now, you reference or remember we talked about fatal funnel. That's what we're talking about here, the doorway. If you were the bad person in this room and I was going to come into the room, where would you point your firearm? Right here at the door. And if I end up dilly-dallying here, you're just going to continue to press that trigger, right, until I stop. So we need to make that a priority to get clear of that. So I'm going to come into this room, and I don't want to stand in this doorway, right? So I need to commit into the room. A good rule of thumb is when you're clearing a room, try to come in no more than 2 or 3 steps, and you're off of the doorway. All right? Why? We talked about we don't want to be in the doorway. It's a fatal funnel.
In there, they're probably looking at that doorway.
Yeah, and here's the other thing. You think about how your house is. I might start turning lights on, but until I get into this room, I might not have the ability to turn a light on in the room, but there's light here. So the minute I stand in the doorway, I'm silhouetted. I'm backlit. So the person who's in the dark room has the advantage and I don't. So I want to clear this relatively quickly so I'm not here standing in, once again, that fatal funnel. All right? And we're going to talk through some options to deal with that tactically before even coming into the room. All right. So those are the basic principles. Corner-fed room, center-fed room. We want to get through the doorway, and then we want to kind of get in here one position or another. Let's work first as an individual, right? Because that's probably the number one situation. The greater likelihood is you're going to be doing this by yourself. So here's my question to you. If I come into this room, I could come in, kind of look into a corner, and then work my way around, okay? But at what point could you start shooting at me, right? Yeah. So here's the problem. You're here in this corner, and I'm staring in that direction. You could start engaging me before you even realize that you're in this room. So one of the challenges we learned several years back from our military counterparts into law enforcement is that instead of rushing into a room, we started doing what was called a threshold clear. The idea is this doorway, almost pie it out like a semicircle. So here's what I'm going to do. Now as I come up, instead of me stepping through that doorway, I'm going to start working my way around. And then if I see something that's dangerous, could I engage it from the hall? Yeah. And here's the benefit is before me even crossing this threshold, visually I've cleared about this much of the room. And then if there's an area that I still am unsure of, the minute I cross this threshold, where do you think my attention will go? Yeah, one of those blind areas, all right? So what we're doing is I'm coming up and I'm kind of using my angles, working my way around, and I see something here, and now I'm into the room, nothing's here, and I'll go into the next room, all right? But that's what we're talking about with a threshold clear. In a corner-fed room, what would be the challenge? Yeah, because I'm pretty much kind of pinned to a wall. So I could start working my way around. Now, good news, bad news, I know that there's nothing here, right? A direct line of sight. So when I cross this line, where's my focus? I'm pretty much going to bring it into that space, and at that point, I'll just start scooping it back out. One of the things you're going to hear me talk about in regards to tactics is curves. Everything that we're doing is not a 90-degree robotic movement, right? You can edit that part. Instead, everything is more or less curves. Why? Which is faster? Right? There's that, right? It's harder to hit a moving target. Here's the good news for us. An untrained marksman, which is really who we're dealing with, right? None of us live in the John Wick world where everyone is a trained assassin. An untrained marksman has about a 22% chance of hitting a moving target. Of that, it's about an 8% chance of being lethal. So the odds are in my favor to do what? To keep moving. All right? The challenge, like what we're going to see today, is how am I shooting accurately while moving? All right, some of us, yesterday we got to do that, moving forward and moving back, and we're like, okay, I have room to improve. We're going to be spending more time kind of moving laterally because that's what we're doing here with the rooms. So I want you to think about moving with those curves. I'm here kind of coming in. At this point, I'll come into one side and kind of scoop out and scan to the other. As an individual, I don't have a partner to depend on. Right? So that's kind of bad news. That's why on tactics side, we're always taking rooms 2 people at a time, right? Because we have somebody to work with. As an individual, as a citizen, it's just not an option for us, right? I'm the protector. I've got to do all of this alone. So questions in regards to making entry as the individual. So here's what we're going to practice. I'm going to have we've got kind of the doorways. We're using these because it helps you visually think about, okay, come on over here to this side of the doors. Sorry, you to think about, just like a regular door frame, I can see a little bit. If I hug this wall, I can see into the room a little bit there. As far as blind spots go, how much blind space do you think exists? So let's flip-flop. So I'm here and I'm looking down the hall. How much space do you think I can't see into the room? It's a pretty narrow sliver. Somebody would have to be more or less like plastered up against the wall. And is that typically what we're seeing from an assailant? No, they're going to be in there probably boogering around, digging into something. All right? When we teach active shooter, the good news for us as the responders is we've had scenarios where the bad guy's holding a gun at a kid and the officer actually is able to engage them from the hallway and they didn't even see him. They took the bad guy out before they could actually do anything. All right, for us, now we have the drop on the bad person. So I want you to think about, you're going to practice, you're coming down the hall, I'll get close, and then I'm going to start kind of pieing my way around. Notice my movements, right? I've tight, semicircle, and I'm back tight. At this point, choose a side. Whatever, it might be, well, there's a piece of furniture here, so it makes more sense for me to go in that direction. All right, you know your houses, where you live, so start thinking about placing that reality on this, all right, and work it as if it was something at home. Here's what I don't want to see. What have I just done? Well, I've introduced me into a space I don't control. Okay, so the likelihood that bad guy X is hiding right here and is going to grab the muzzle, because that was always a point of irritation for me with training law enforcement. They'd have a bad guy go, "Don't put your muzzle in, they're going to grab it." And I was like, what the hell are they doing standing right there? The greater concern to me is the minute you produce something in this space, they could see it. I don't want to let them know I'm here until I'm ready. So what I'm doing is I'm backing off, using that space, and then when I'm ready to commit into this space, I make that decision. All right? So what we'll do is we'll just kind of have you choose the doorway here, and I want you to just kind of work through pieing your way around, and then stepping into the room, right? Whichever direction you want. What do you notice about my footwork? It's elegant, thank you. 10 years of dance. Yeah, I'm not bouncing. When we get out here to the range, if you're starting to do one of these, because a lot of people, that's just what they think. They're like, oh, sidestep, sidestep, sidestep. The minute I bring my feet together, I'm tall, I widen, I'm short, I'm tall, and you're bouncing. What we want to do is try and stay level, and now think of it as your movements are like a tank. From the waist up, this is your turret, all right? These are your tracks. My legs, my feet don't move. Everything's done here at the waist. So now when I'm moving my way across the threshold, notice my footsteps are pretty normal, just everything's happening here above the waist. So that's what I'm looking for from you. Think about keeping that gun level, because this afternoon you've got to shoot targets accurately. And if you're doing a lot of this, that's going to become an accuracy problem. All right? There you go. That's very smooth. I like that.
Don't feel rushed, and feel free to take your time.
Yeah, and then keep going through. Remember, for those who were with us yesterday, I was talking about short steps. When you're moving, I want you to watch the muzzle. All right? If you see a lot of this, change what you're doing with your feet. So as I'm moving, I'm keeping everything relatively level, right? Not a whole lot of bounce. So that's what we're looking for. All right, keep working through it. Keep working through it. So you're back outside and you're doing it again. Back outside, doing it again. So here's what we're going to do. So come on over here. Okay. I'm sorry, what's your name, sir?
Larry.
Larry?
Yeah.
So here's what we do, Larry. Without the gun, I just want you to do this. Just like that. All right? Do it again, and not even less thought, because right now you're like, okay, Matt took 4 steps in this direction. All I want you to do is just
do the circle.
Yep, just and then smooth right in. That's what we're looking for. The idea, folks, is if I'm smooth, I'm able to maintain control a lot better. So now as I'm walking across, I'm just taking these little steps and I'm inside of the room. Don't feel like you have to, because that's what we're taught from what we see other people doing, right? You know, all the SWAT movies and the tactic, you know, they're rushing here and then they're rushing there and they're rushing there. Problem is, you try and maintain accuracy, that's a lot of bounce, all right? And think of it as somebody inside there could be shooting back. I'd much prefer to at least have some level of concealment, and if I have to engage from out here, I'll do that, all right? Yeah, keep working, keep working, keep working. There you go, good. Look at your muzzle, everything's looking smooth. So one thing, try to avoid crossing your feet. So when we're pieing across, I want you to think about keeping those feet more or less in the direction of travel, and then I'll step as opposed to trying to step across, because anytime I cross my feet, my center balance is off. Yeah. Yeah, I think what's going to happen, take small steps. I want you to take really tiny steps and try it. Don't even worry about the gun. Don't even worry about the gun. Just take little tiny steps. Yeah. So I'm kind of here, taking my little steps, and then I'll step into the room. Yeah, keep going, keep going. All right. So watch each other, and if you're like, okay, wow, that looked really smooth, what did they do that you aren't? That it's so noticeable, and if they're like, oh, no, I noticed they bounce a lot. Okay, what is it causing that bounce? Learn from each other. All right, the goods and the bads both. And don't be afraid to go, hey, have you ever tried this? Or I notice you're doing that. There you go. Good. And in my mind, there's no need to worry about kind of dropping. Yeah, here's the thing. Folks, look up here for a second. One of the things when we start talking about clearing with that sidearm, here's what I want you to think about. Your field of view, right? We talked about peripheral vision, right? That's important. Here's the other thing. So if I use Tony here as an example, having my gun at this level, I can see his body, right? And if he was a threat, I could bring the gun up. The problem is, if I already have the gun up in my face, Tony, hold your hands down below your waist. I have no idea what's in his hands. So now what that's forcing me to do is to lower the gun. Oh, that's a gun, and then come back up. Think about having it to where I have full field of view, right? I don't have this big hunk of metal in my face. And some of us are laser focused on the front sight. So not only do we have this hunk of metal in our face, but all we're focusing on with one eye is that little dot. Get in the habit of using your peripheral vision, right? Scanning that environment. If you then see a threat, bring the gun up. All right?
Yeah, I mean, we're at such close range, you could probably just point without.
And that's exactly what you're going to see. At this distance, think about in your residence. I mean, I live in a pretty modest-sized home. Even in my longest hallway because there's living room and kitchen are all one room, from the furthest corner to the furthest corner is probably from where I'm standing to Tony's coat. All right, so that is 25. No, not even. That's like 15-ish yards, right? Give or take. That's the max distance that you're going to be able to find in my house. And that's with nothing else in between us. When we start talking about rooms that are 10 by 12, or maybe even a larger room that might be 10 by or 12 by 20, that's going to be the max distance. So you're exactly right. It's going to be just a lot of, oh, bang, oh, right? The gun's going to come up as that quick response. So get in that habit of having it low and you're looking over top of it so you can identify. So now switch doorways. So that way it gives you a little different perspective. And if you want, yeah, there you go. You guys are already doing it. Set up onto the next room and think about I've cleared one room into the next room, cleared one room into the next room. There we go. A little bit of merengue there at the end where it was.
L1, L2 is really good.
Oh, yeah. Here's the thing that I want you to think about. And some of you are already experiencing it with these floors. Like for me, the shoes I'm wearing are very slick on this dusty floor, which is actually good. Because what it's forcing me to do is be very cautious with my steps. If you think about how we walk on ice, I don't take big steps, I don't lift my feet. I try and maintain a good level of balance and 2 points of contact with the ground. When you're moving around these doorways, I want you to think of it in the same regard. When you are walking on an icy pavement, you're probably not crossing your feet much because you don't have a good base. So get in that habit that as you're walking around, right, I'm trying to keep both points of contact as much as possible. All right, so just like ice, we're going to treat this the same. All right, we got everybody through. Everybody feel pretty confident with that? Let's get just a couple more in, get into the next room. Let me see what we got. There you go, slow, slow. And you don't have to feel like you got to drag. I know I'm talking about, oh, touch, touch, touch. And what tends to happen is you go from here to wha-bang to the other extreme. Just find something you're comfortable with to where it's more or less I'm keeping my low center of gravity, and as I'm walking, I don't go from 6'2" to like 5'6", because that's going to be difficult for an extended period of time. Instead, I'm just kind of keep, relatively good posture, and I'm just kind of moving around and checking my environment. There we go, working good angles, good angles. And remember, the gun doesn't drive us, we drive the gun. Some of you, I'm noticing it looks like there is a line and a person is pulling the gun out of your hands and you're just kind of being dragged around. You don't have to be at that full extension. If anything, think about the space in which you occupy. It might make more sense for you to have a more collapsed position. All right, a collapsed body position where the gun's a little closer to your body. And now if I need to, what can I do? If I see a threat, I can punch directly out. Now I could go to full extension. But while I'm moving, you're going to notice that it's a little closer to my body. It allows me to be relatively close to objects, as opposed to if I'm in full lockout, now I'm a little bit more limited. It's almost like having a shotgun in front of me. For me, because I got gorilla arms, that pistol is now like 18 inches. Whereas if I kind of keep it more compressed, I have a little bit more latitude to move around. All right, so try that out a little bit. You can still, if you see a threat, yes?
When you're coming out of this room, my thoughts were to go to that wall after you get checking it, then go into your circle for that room.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I always look at,
you know that's clear when you come.
Yeah, that's a wall, so it makes more sense for me to go to the unknown. And then from here, I'll set up. All right, and where's my next unknown? Our key is to always, at most, go from a known to an unknown. What does that mean? Well, that's a great question. Glad you asked it. The space I'm in is the known, isn't it? The hallway, right? However I got here, I knew everything. As I pass it, I am processing it. I own that space, right? I cleared it to get here. So outside of the doorway, where's the unknown? Inside of the room. So what I'm doing is I'm using the known and I'm visually clearing as much of this space. So now 70% of this room is known to me. So where's my next focus is the unknowns, which are typically these blind corners in a center fed or a deep corner in a corner fed. So, and then when we start looking at additional rooms, it's the same process. I'm going to try and pie doors. How many of you on a regular basis keep your bedroom doors closed? You're not firefighters, are you? Because what the fire service states is, hey, all the doors should be closed. So good news, bad news. Good news for us is we've been practicing clearing open doorways. Well, what if we had to clear a closed door? So how would we do that? Well, yeah, there you go. I mean, I got to open it, right? Probably not going to kapow, kick it through. Now, here's what I want you to think about. You're in a hallway. This is a bedroom. How does the door open? It opens in, right? What are exceptions to that rule? Closet, door opens out, and then possibly one other situation. Yeah, there's that. Yeah, we could see, some of the half baths. Yeah, and we start talking about pocket doors, yeah. So if we're talking about going from a hallway to a bedroom, we know the door's going to open in. So with that being said, is there a way for me to do that and still process the room the same way? So here's what we're going to do. By myself, once again, so let's say this is the doorknob, right? I'm going to come up, I'm going to open the door. Well, I could be on that side. Why would I be on this side?
Because if that's a wall, the door most likely I think would open this way.
Oh, no, that's you bring up a great point. So let's clarify. Let's say it's a center fed room. All right. So the doorknob's here. Does it make more sense for me to open it here or to be on this side of the door and open it? Well, let's talk about it. Why? Why do you say on the knob side?
Unless the guy's going to shoot through the wall there, but I mean, open it here. If you open the door, it's going to open in. You're not in sight of the door in case of the light.
Yeah. There's that.
Now the other side is if you're opening it here, you can at least see in, but now you're exposed.
There you go. So there's always positives and negatives. It's very rare that it's a 100% negative or 100% positive. So what he's talking about, the door's opening, this is the hinge. So let's say, Tony, I'm going to borrow you for a second. Tony's standing here on the hinge side. He reaches over, unlocks the knob and pushes. So this is what he's seeing, right? As the door opens up, he's seeing the room, but in the same vein, he's exposed. What's his body position look like? So you don't have to do it super slow-mo, right? And here I am, a better door than a window. So this is the knob, so you reach across and you open the door, right? You throw it open. So one of the things that we're looking at is, great, he's got quick eyes into the room, but is his body position the best? Probably less than. So there's good news, bad news. He sees the room right away, he's able to process stuff, but he might not be in the best position. So now coming from the other side, he opens the door, right? And he throws open, so now all he sees is door. But what could he do the minute he throws the door open? Yeah, he goes right back to pawing the door just like we've done. So that's why I'm suggesting go to the knob side, throw it open, let the door do what it was designed to do, and as it's working, you're kind of processing the room, and then you're following in behind it. All right? What if it was an outward opening door? Well, that's easy, because if it's an outward opening door, do I want him to be on the hinge side? No. So pretty much knob side, inward or outward. All right? So what I want you to do is just think about in your residence, I'll throw that doorknob, pushing it open from here, kind of working my way across, and then I'm into the room. All right? When this door is being thrown open, right, I've got to wait till it reaches a point to where, okay, now I can start processing the room. The good news for us is typically our bedroom or interior doors under tension bars. Like if you go into a business, if you throw the front door open, what is the door designed to do? Close back up, right? Or an industry business, Whereas in your bedroom, you throw it open and it'll probably just pin against a wall or a piece of furniture. So that's good for us. The exceptions being, like I said, maybe a front door or a storm door, where it will have a closer on it. So now let's incorporate the door and clearing that threshold, dealing with the door. So you can work it as an outward opening door, inward opening door. I want you to start thinking about things in regards to where you live. Practice what works for your place of residence. All right? What's that? So, great question. Do we clear closets as well? Yeah. If I'm clearing a house, I'll give you a perfect example. Years back, we had a Haitian gang. It was the Zopound gang. It's a goofy name. I didn't name them. But they were working up in our region, and they actually put a hit out on two of my team members. So the entire team was kind of under duress, and so I was taking alternate routes home and blah, blah, blah. Well, I made the mistake of sharing with my wife why I was doing this behavior. My wife tends to have nightmares. So she wakes up in the middle of the night, did you hear that? Well, there's a hit out on, what? Here, what? And she's like, wait, I think I'm asleep. And I was like, fuck. So here I am clearing, the entire structure, closets included, because it's not clear until I can verify that there's no one who's hiding in here. So to answer your question, yeah, I'm going to practice, clearing a closet. The good news for us dealing with pistols is a closet's a pretty confined space. Half bathroom's pretty confined space. So we can compress our stance a little bit, whereas if you were clearing the house with that shotgun, now you're trying to put the stock above your shoulder and open the closet door, and it's a little bit more cumbersome. So yes, if you want to treat like that's a closet, maybe this is your dream walk-in, or here at the half bath, whatever, please feel free. All right, so let's keep processing. We're going to work through it. It's good entry. Now, since you have the light, I would start practicing, have that light out there.
Well, I have a theory to ask you about.
Yeah. And then just think about, watch losing your balance. What it seemed like on that one, you were leaning, and then you actually
And that took
crossed
a step.
over.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I was off balance, but I might be. With me,
Mhm.
because all my ceilings are white, all my walls are dark.
Mhm.
The thing I've been practicing coming in.
Yeah, so
Because then I can.
I learned that Department of Corrections, because doing cell extractions, they always shine their lights onto the ceiling.
Because then you get
It,
diffusion. At
yeah,
least. You see
ambient light.
motion, right?
That's it.
It's the only reason I don't like that light right now.
Yeah. All right, come back. So here's what I want. Instead of taking the little stutter steps, yeah, keep the gun. Yeah, here, actually, I'll hold the gun. I want you just to walk over. Is that how you would walk? No, just walk. Perfect. That's what I want you to start doing, because you spend all your time walking like this and very little time walking like that. So yeah, and I get it. I go, hey, put this in your hand, and then suddenly you're like, your brain goes, what? And
I even closed my eye at one point.
yeah, so instead, just get in that habit. Okay, hey, I'm just going to walk over here. I'm going to look inside of this room. There's nothing. And now I'm going to walk over here. Much better, yeah. Smoother. Yeah, you're finding it. You're finding it, and that's the key. It's your dream. You do it how you want.
In my house, it's not.
So one of the things, it's just a personal thing, is I'm not a fan of ever walking backwards if I don't have to. So when we talk about kind of backing off, I'm going to more step off to a side because I can see this, and then I'm just going to walk over here, and then I'm going to walk over here. All right? Whereas I'm not sweeping backward. It's a technique, especially if you drag that foot to sweep. But I like, instead, I'm going to turn into a known as opposed to stepping back. I don't want you to program yourselves that I'm always going to go left or always go right, because quite honestly, bump in the night moments, that's what's going to drive us, right? Not necessarily, okay, hey, I always trained to do it this way, but now I ended up, I was over here for some reason. Well, I've got to come back here because this is, don't get into a rut in that regard. When it comes to either or, just you kind of go with the moment. I know it's not a black and white answer, but it's the one that makes the most sense to me. The other thing I want you to start thinking about is that you might reach a point inside of this room space, and now that you've got to actually commit a little deeper into an area. Remember, right now everything we've done has just been, hey, you sweep across the threshold here, you step into a room, and then you move over somewhere else. You guys, some of you are already thinking about it. Hey, I've got a dresser here, so now I want to actually start working the same process, layers and angles, what we talked about pieing or threshold clearing. We could do this, could be a dresser, and I'm in the room now. And now I'm going to back off that corner and just kind of work my way around doing the same thing. When you're clearing furniture, so let's say this bar here is a piece of furniture. I've got two options, right? I could be right up on top of it and do this, or what could I do? Given the space in the room, what's the benefit one over the other? Is there one better than another? Okay, there's that.
On this corner, is a guy tucked in here possibly? Is it here? Do you have a way out? Which is quicker for you?
Okay, so there's that. Here's the way I look at it when we talk about angles, okay? So right now, if I'm right on top of it, one, he's big, right? Because we're close, but who else is big? Me. If I'm further off and I start working these angles, I might end up catching a piece, right? A leg, a foot. And at that point, I'm going to get into my law enforcement role now. I'm not shooting a boot.
But now I'm like, I see you, I see you. Show me your hands, show me your hands. You're right. Now I have the tactical advantage, right? And if they do any kind of surreptitious, then I might make a different decision. But I like the idea that from a distance, you might see a part of them, whereas if I'm right on top, it almost becomes an equal